The security guard at Gate 4 of the Family Feud studios in Atlanta would later say he had never, in 11 years of working that post, let someone through without a credential badge. He would also say he never regretted a decision more quickly in his life. The woman who walked past him on the morning of March 14, 2019, was not on any guest list. She was not a contestant. She was not a network executive or a sponsor's representative or someone's plus one. She was 53 years old, she weighed 91 pounds, and she had driven 4 hours from Savannah, Georgia alone in a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a check engine light that had been on since November. Her name was Darlene Mossgrove, and she was dying. The guard would tell reporters later that she smiled at him the way people smile when they've already made peace with something the rest of the world hasn't caught up to yet. A quiet smile. Not sad, just settled. He said she told him she just needed 5 minutes and that she promised she wouldn't cause any trouble. He said something about her voice made him step aside. He couldn't explain it any better than that. Inside Studio 4, the Henderson family from Decatur was in the middle of taping their second episode. They'd been doing well. The father, Marcus, 47, a high school basketball coach, had a gift for the buzzer. His mother, Edna, 71, kept whispering answers to herself half a second before anyone else spoke. The youngest, Jalen, 16, kept looking at the audience instead of the board, which made Steve Harvey laugh every single time. It was a warm taping, easy energy, the kind of afternoon that makes the crew forget they've been on their feet since 6 in the morning. Darlene had been standing in the back of the studio for almost 20 minutes before anyone realized she wasn't supposed to be there. She had found a seat near the aisle in the 3rd row. She had folded her hands in her lap. She had watched Steve work the crowd the way she had watched him every weekday for 4 years from the recliner in the living room of the house on Oleander Drive, where she had raised her 3 children, where she had nursed her mother through the last year of her life, and where she had been sitting alone on a Tuesday morning in September of 2018 when the doctor called and told her that the mass in her pancreas was not something they could operate on. She had not told her children that day. She had hung up the phone, walked to the kitchen, washed the 2 dishes in the sink, dried them, put them away, and then stood at the window for a long time looking at the yard. Her daughter Kezia had called that evening, and Darlene had told her it was a good day. She had told Marcus Jr. the same thing when he texted. She had told her youngest, Brianna, 21, that she was thinking of repainting the living room, and asked her opinion on a color called warm linen. She did not mention the phone call. She did not mention the word pancreatic. She did not mention that the oncologist had used the phrase palliative at least 4 times, and had said the word months in a way that made it sound like a very small number. She carried it for 6 weeks before Brianna noticed. Brianna would describe it later in an interview as a collection of small things that added up to something she didn't want to name. Her mother stopped drinking coffee. Her mother, who had made a pot every single morning for 30 years, who had a specific mug that no one else was allowed to use, who measured her grounds with a teaspoon and took exactly 4 minutes with the French press, stopped. She started organizing, not cleaning, organizing. The filing cabinet, the kitchen junk drawer, the box of photographs in the hall closet that had been sealed with packing tape since 2003. She gave Brianna her grandmother's pearl earrings on a random Wednesday in October for no reason she would explain. She said she just wanted her to have them while she could see her enjoy them. Brianna sat with that sentence for 3 days before she asked. Darlene did not lie to her. She had decided in those 6 weeks that she would only lie once. She had permitted herself one lie, and she had told it to herself. That they would all be okay. Everything else she told truthfully when someone asked. She sat with Brianna on the couch on a Friday night, and she told her about the Mass, and the oncologist, and the word palliative, and the number 60 days, which had by then shrunk to closer to 45. Brianna did not cry in front of her. Darlene would say later, on that studio stage, that this was the bravest thing she had ever seen a person do. Her 21-year-old daughter held it together for the entire conversation, and then went to her car and did not come back inside for an hour. What Darlene did not tell any of her children, not Kezia, not Marcus Jr., not Brianna, was what she was most afraid of. It wasn't the pain, though the pain had become a thing with weight and teeth. It wasn't even dying. It was this. The house on Oleander Drive had a mortgage with $74,000 remaining. The life insurance policy she had paid into for 19 years had lapsed in August, 14 months before she got sick. During the 8 months, she had worked reduced hours to care for her own mother and couldn't keep up with every bill. She had been meaning to reinstate it. She had written it on 3 different to-do lists. She never had. Her children did not know. They thought the policy was active. They had never had reason to think otherwise. She had called the insurance company in October. She had spoken to 4 different representatives across 6 phone calls. She had filed a reinstatement application that was denied due to the new medical diagnosis making her uninsurable. She had contacted a financial advisor who told her that with her current income, she had been a dental hygienist for 22 years and had been on medical leave since November, her estate would likely not cover the remaining mortgage. The house would almost certainly have to be sold. Her children were going to lose the house she had raised them in, and there was nothing she could do from where she was standing. She had lain awake in that house on Oleander Drive for 63 nights, carrying the weight of that fact. And it had cost her something in her face, something behind her eyes that even she could see in the bathroom mirror. The system had not been designed for a woman who took a year off to care for her mother and fell behind on a premium and then got sick 14 months later. The system had no category for that. The system had simply processed her denial and moved on. In January, her pastor had suggested she write a letter to Family Feud. She had laughed. Then she had thought about it for 2 weeks. Then she had written the letter. The producers had responded warmly and told her they would reach out if a slot opened. She had waited. She understood, after 6 weeks with no follow-up call, that a slot was not going to open. She had 40 days left according to the last estimate, which by March had become a range the doctors gave her like a weather forecast. Possible improvement if she responded to a new pain management protocol. Possible faster decline if she didn't. She had driven to Atlanta because she had run out of time to wait for a phone call. The floor director saw her first. He walked over quietly and crouched beside her row and asked in a low voice if she was a ticketed audience member. She showed him the letter she had written, the one with the Family Feud logo on the response email she'd printed out. She said she just needed 5 minutes. She said she had driven 4 hours. The floor director, whose name was David Chen, had been with the show for 9 years. He would later say he walked to the production booth and told the supervising producer 2 sentences, and that the supervising producer did not hesitate. They paused the taping. Steve Harvey was told, between takes, that there was a woman in the audience who had stage 4 pancreatic cancer and had driven from Savannah and needed to speak to him. Steve Harvey had been hosting this show for 8 years at that point. He had seen a great deal. He walked out from behind the set, still in his suit, still mic'd, and he walked directly to the 3rd row. He sat down next to her, not on stage, not at a podium, in the audience seat. He turned his body toward her the way you turn toward someone at a kitchen table when you're about to have the real conversation. And he said, quietly, not for the cameras, "What do you need?" She told him about the mortgage, about the insurance lapse, about the letter and the wait and the drive. Her hands were folded in her lap the whole time. She did not cry. He listened without interrupting for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which the control room later confirmed from the tape. A producer near the camera put her clipboard down. One of the lighting technicians, a man named Roy, who had worked on television sets for 30 years, took off his headset and set it on a case nearby. The studio fell completely silent. Steve stood up. He extended his hand and helped her to her feet, and he walked her to the stage. Not because it was scripted, not because a producer told him to, he walked her to the stage, and he stood her at the center of it, and he turned to the Henderson family, who had watched all of this from their podium, and Marcus Henderson Sr., the basketball coach from Decatur, had his hand pressed flat against his chest, and Edna, 71 years old, had both of her hands over her mouth, and Jalen, 16, was crying without making any sound at all, the way teenagers cry when they're trying very hard not to. Steve turned back to Darlene. He looked at her for a long moment. The whole room was still. He said, "God sent you here today." The audience did not applaud immediately. There was a second where no one moved. Then, someone in the back started, and it built the way things build when they're true, rather than performed. But Steve wasn't done. He called his producing team to the stage. On camera, in front of the audience, in front of the Henderson family, in front of Darlene Mossgrove, who was standing at the center of a stage she had walked onto without permission because she had run out of time for permission. He announced that the show would be covering the remaining balance on her mortgage. $74,000. In full. He said it clearly, simply, without theater, the way you say something when you mean it completely and don't need it to be dramatic. He said it, and then he turned to the camera and he said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home." He said, "There are people in your life right now who are carrying something they haven't told you about. Not because they don't trust you, because they love you too much to let you carry it with them." He said, "If you know someone who is sick, don't wait for them to ask. Ask them what they need." The studio fell completely silent again, and then Marcus Henderson Sr. walked across the stage. He walked all the way from his family's podium to where Darlene was standing, and he put his arms around her, this woman he had never met, and he held on. Edna Henderson followed. Jalen followed. The opposing family, the Kirks from Birmingham, who had been waiting off stage to tape their own episode, had gathered in the wings and were watching. And the mother of that family, a woman named Patricia Kirk, walked onto the stage without being called and took Darlene's hand and held it in both of hers. No one had told any of them to do this. No one had to. But Steve wasn't done. He had spoken to his foundation team during the commercial break that followed, and when the cameras came back on, he announced a second thing. The Steve Harvey Foundation was establishing a fund specifically for caregivers, people who, like Darlene, had spent themselves caring for a parent or a spouse or a child, and had fallen behind on insurance or savings or bills during that time, and were now facing financial crisis on top of medical crisis. He said the fund would open with $250,000, and that he was personally matching every donation that came in for the next 30 days. Darlene Mossgrove stood at the center of the stage with her hands folded in front of her, the same way they had been folded in the third row of the audience when no one knew she was there. She was 91 pounds, and she had driven 4 hours alone, and she was 53 years old, and she had 6 weeks, give or take, and she was smiling the same smile the gate guard had seen, the quiet one, the settled one, the one that does not belong to hope exactly, the one that belongs to something older than hope. The crew was not all right. Roy, the lighting technician who had set down his headset, had not put it back on. 2 camera operators had pulled back from their eyepieces. A production assistant near the exit door was standing with her back against the wall and her arms crossed over her chest, the way people stand when they are trying to hold themselves together. It was the first time in the 45-year history of Family Feud that a taping had been paused for a member of the audience. It would also be the last. The studio fell completely silent one final time before Steve put his arm around Darlene and walked her slowly to the edge of the stage. The clip the production team posted 3 days later ran for 7 minutes and 43 seconds. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed 19 million times. Within a week, 44 million. It was shared in 17 languages. A comment in Portuguese from São Paulo, Brazil, translated roughly as, "I don't know this woman and I cannot stop crying." A comment from a woman in Manila, "My mother is sick and I haven't told my children either. I'm calling them right now." The clip became, according to YouTube's own internal data, the most shared non-news video of the first quarter of 2019. The Caregivers Bridge Fund, as Steve's team named it, received $2.3 million in donations in its first 30 days. The matching commitment brought the total to just over $4.6 million. In the first year, the fund assisted 847 families in situations similar to Darlene's. People who had given years of their lives to caring for someone else and had paid for it in ways that didn't show up until later, when the bills arrived. 3 months after the taping, Darlene Mossgrove was still in the house on Oleander Drive. Her children knew, by then, everything she had been carrying. Kezia had taken a leave of absence from her job and moved into the guest room. Marcus Jr. drove down from Charlotte every weekend. Brianna had not left. A year after that day in the studio, Brianna gave an interview to a local Savannah news station. She said her mother had held on for 7 months, longer than any of the estimates. She said the doctors couldn't fully explain it. She said her mother had told her, in one of the last weeks, that the drive to Atlanta had done something for her that she didn't have a word for. That it had settled something, that she had needed to do one last thing that was hard, and she had done it. And after that, the fear had changed shape into something she could live inside. Brianna said the house still smelled like her mother's coffee, even though Darlene had never started making it again. Today, the Caregivers Bridge Fund has helped more than 4,000 families across 31 states. Marcus Henderson Sr. volunteers as a mentor for the fund's community outreach program in Decatur. Jalen Henderson, now 21, gave a speech at the fund's 3rd annual gala and said he thinks about Darlene Mossgrove every time he coaches the youth basketball team he now helps run on weekends. Edna Henderson, 74, sends a card to the fund's Atlanta office on the 14th of March every year. The security guard at Gate 4, the one who stepped aside, his name is Trevor. He keeps a small framed note on his desk at the studio. It says, in Darlene's handwriting, because she wrote it to him on a piece of paper she found in her purse while she was waiting in the audience. Thank you for trusting a stranger. He has worked at that gate for 11 more years since that morning. He has never let anyone through without a badge again. He says he doesn't need to. He says you know when something is supposed to happen. Some people drive 4 hours with a cracked dashboard and a check engine light and a quiet smile because they have run out of days to wait for the phone to ring. And sometimes the gate opens. And sometimes what they came to give is so much larger than what they came to ask for that the world doesn't quite know how to hold it. And so, 44 million people share a 7-minute video in a week. And a fund named after a bridge gets $4 million in a month. And a 21-year-old coaches youth basketball on Saturdays. And a gate guard keeps a handwritten note on his desk. And a house on Oleander Drive stays in the family. There are people in your life right now carrying something they haven't told you about yet. Steve Harvey said so on camera, and he was right. And that is the whole story. And it is not only a television story, it is a Tuesday morning story, a kitchen window story, a folded hands in the third row story. It is about what happens when one person decides that love is not only something you feel, but something you drive 4 hours in a cracked car to demonstrate. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this channel reach someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you're new here, because every week we bring you moments like this one. Real stories, real people, real courage. And share this with someone you love. Not later, right now, because Darlene would have.